Welcome back to Unsolved Crime Case, the place where we dive deep into the darkest and most chilling true crime stories from around the world. If you're new here, don't forget to subscribe, because every week we uncover the cases that still haunt history. And tonight's story is one of the most disturbing of them all. They called it the trial of the century. A beloved football hero, adored by millions, stood accused of the most unthinkable crime: the brutal murders of his ex-wife, Nicole Brown Simpson, and her friend, Ron Goldman. For over a year, the world stopped to watch as O.J. Simpson's life unraveled in front of cameras, reporters, and a divided nation. But how did one of America's most celebrated athletes, a man who had seemingly conquered fame and fortune, end up at the center of one of the most sensational murder trials in history? Was he a jealous killer driven by rage, or a victim of a corrupt police force and a racially biased justice system? Before we dive in, a quick disclaimer. This documentary retells real events as they were reported and recorded. It does not glorify violence, nor does it encourage harmful behavior. The details are disturbing, and discretion is advised. Stay with me, because in this story, every twist, from the crime scene to the infamous Bronco chase, from the shocking glove demonstration to the final verdict, will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about justice in America. This is the story of O.J. Simpson and the trial that changed America forever. It was a warm Sunday night, June 12, 1994, in the upscale Los Angeles neighborhood of Brentwood. Nicole Brown Simpson, age 35, had spent the evening at a family dinner with friends and her children. Later, she returned to her condo on Bundy Drive. Just after 10 p.m., a quiet night turned into a scene of horror. Shortly after midnight, a neighbor walking their dog stumbled upon a gruesome sight. Lying at the bottom of the front steps was Nicole, brutally murdered. Her throat had been cut so deeply she was nearly decapitated. Nearby was Ron Goldman, a 25-year-old waiter and friend, who had come by to return a pair of glasses Nicole's mother had left at the restaurant where he worked. Goldman had been stabbed repeatedly, his body showing signs of a desperate struggle. The crime scene was shocking in its violence. Blood was everywhere, on the walkway, the gate, and the victim's clothing. Police quickly arrived and secured the area. What they found painted the picture of a ferocious attack, one that was fueled not only by rage, but by something deeply personal. As investigators examined the scene, they discovered bloody footprints leading away from the bodies. Drops of blood were found on the walkway, and lying at the scene was a dark leather glove, soaked in blood. At that moment, no one could have predicted that this single piece of evidence would later become one of the most infamous objects in American legal history. News of the murders quickly reached the LAPD. Within hours, suspicion turned toward one man: Nicole's ex-husband, Orenthal James O.J. Simpson. Here we reveal the evidence piling up, how O.J. became the prime suspect, and the unforgettable Bronco chase that stunned the world. When detectives learned that Nicole's ex-husband was none other than O.J. Simpson, one of the most recognizable athletes and celebrities in America, they immediately understood the stakes. Simpson was a national icon, a Hall of Fame running back, a sports commentator, an actor, and a man whose charm and smile had made him a household name. But to the LAPD, the evidence quickly pointed in his direction. That same night, detectives went to Simpson's estate on Rockingham Avenue in Brentwood. There, they found more blood drops leading up the driveway. And in the backyard, they discovered a second glove, identical to the one found at the crime scene, and also soaked in blood. Inside Simpson's white Ford Bronco, investigators later found traces of blood matching both victims. Hair and fibers linked him to the scene, and O.J. himself had a cut on his left hand, a wound he could not clearly explain. By June 17, 1994, police had gathered enough evidence to charge Simpson with double murder. But when it came time for him to surrender, O.J. did not show up at the agreed location. Instead, he vanished. What happened next became one of the most surreal moments in American history. That evening, millions of Americans turned on their televisions to see live helicopter footage of a white Ford Bronco moving slowly along the Los Angeles freeways. Inside was O.J. Simpson in the back seat, holding a gun to his head, while his longtime friend Al Cowlings drove. It wasn't a high-speed pursuit. It was a slow, rolling caravan. Police cars trailing cautiously, news helicopters hovering above, and crowds of bystanders gathering on overpasses, waving and shouting as the Bronco passed by. The chase lasted more than an hour, with an estimated 95 million people watching live on television. When the Bronco finally returned to Simpson's estate, police found inside a disguise kit, a passport, nearly $9,000 in cash, and a handgun. To many, it looked like the actions of a guilty man preparing to flee. To others, it was the desperate act of a man cornered and overwhelmed. That night, Simpson was taken into custody. America was stunned. The beloved sports star, the smiling pitchman, the man who had once been called the Juice, now stood accused of one of the most brutal double murders in modern history. The stage was set for a trial unlike any the world had ever seen. This covers the police work, the building of the case, the dream team defense, and how the trial exploded into a full-blown media circus. By the time the trial officially began in January of 1995, the case was already being called the trial of the century. It wasn't just a murder trial anymore. It was a national obsession. The evidence, the celebrities, the stakes. It all collided inside a Los Angeles courtroom presided over by Judge Lance Ito. The prosecution believed they had an airtight case, led by Marcia Clark and Christopher Darden. They argued that O.J. Simpson was a jealous, controlling ex-husband who could not let go of Nicole. They detailed his history of domestic violence, pointing to police calls from Nicole's home during their marriage. And they presented what looked like overwhelming forensic evidence. Blood samples that matched O.J., Nicole, and Ron. The bloody glove found at his estate. Fibers from Simpson's Bronco and clothing linked to the victims. DNA analysis, a relatively new tool at the time, showing statistical matches that prosecutors called undeniable. But Simpson was not just any defendant. He was a wealthy celebrity who could afford a defense unlike anything seen before. His legal team, quickly dubbed the Dream Team, included Robert Shapiro, Johnny Cochran, F. Lee Bailey, Alan Dershowitz, and Robert Kardashian. Each was a star in their own right, and together, they built a strategy not to prove O.J.'s innocence, but to raise doubt in the jury's minds. The defense attacked every weakness in the prosecution's case. They claimed evidence was mishandled, contaminated, or outright planted by a corrupt LAPD. The key target of their strategy became Detective Mark Furman, the man who had found the bloody glove at Simpson's estate. When the defense revealed Furman's history of racist remarks, it shifted the narrative. Suddenly, the case wasn't just about murder. It was about race, police corruption, and America's deep mistrust of its justice system. As the trial unfolded, the media transformed it into a daily spectacle. Cameras broadcast every testimony, every cross-examination, every objection. Cable news dissected each moment. Talk shows debated guilt or innocence. Newspapers ran headlines as if it were a presidential election. The nation was split. Some saw O.J. as a cold-blooded killer hiding behind his fame. Others saw him as a black man framed by a racist police force in a city still reeling from the Rodney King beating and the L.A. riots. And then came the turning point, the moment that would change everything, the glove demonstration. Midway through the trial, the prosecution decided to deliver what they believed would be the decisive blow. They asked O.J. Simpson to try on the leather gloves found at the crime scene and at his estate. The gloves, they said, tied him directly to the murders. The moment was broadcast live to millions. O.J. rose from his seat, slipped on a pair of latex gloves for safety, and then attempted to pull the blood-stained leather gloves over his hands. To everyone watching, the gloves appeared too small. Simpson struggled, flexing his fingers, grimacing as he tugged at them, finally declaring, "They don't fit." That single moment, captured on television and replayed endlessly, shook the prosecution's case to its core. And Johnny Cochran seized the opportunity. In his closing arguments, he delivered the phrase that would echo across history: "If it doesn't fit, you must acquit." But the gloves weren't the only twist. The defense relentlessly attacked the LAPD's handling of evidence. They argued that blood samples were mishandled, that police officers tracked evidence from the crime scene to Simpson's home, and that DNA testing, still new to the public, was unreliable. And then came Detective Mark Furman. On tape, Furman had used racist slurs and bragged about framing suspects. When these tapes were revealed, it destroyed his credibility and reinforced the defense's argument that O.J. Simpson had been targeted by a corrupt, racist system. The jury, made up of mostly African-American men and women, sat through months of conflicting testimony, emotional arguments, and media frenzy. Outside the courtroom, the country was deeply divided. To some, Simpson's guilt seemed undeniable. To others, he symbolized a black man finally standing up against decades of systemic abuse by law enforcement. And as the trial dragged on, a question began to echo louder and louder across the nation. Could O.J. Simpson really walk free? Stay with me, because what happened next shocked the entire world. After more than 8 months of testimony, when the jury finally returned with their verdict, it took less than 5 hours of deliberation to decide the fate of the most famous defendant in America. On October 3, 1995, after one of the longest and most publicized trials in American history, the jury returned to the courtroom. The nation held its breath. Offices stopped work, schools wheeled in televisions, and nearly 150 million people tuned in to watch the moment live. The clerk read the verdict. "We, the jury, in the above entitled action find the defendant, Orenthal James Simpson, not guilty of the crime of murder." Gasps echoed through the courtroom. O.J. Simpson let out a sigh of relief. Across America, reactions split down racial and cultural lines. Many black Americans cheered, seeing the verdict as a victory against a system they believed had long been stacked against them. Many white Americans, and others who believed the evidence was overwhelming, were stunned, angry, and convinced that a murderer had just walked free. The trial was over, but the debate had only just begun. For years afterward, people would argue about the evidence, the glove demonstration, and the role race played in the verdict. Was O.J. truly innocent, or had his wealth and fame bought him freedom? But Simpson's legal battles were far from finished. In 1997, the families of Nicole Brown Simpson and Ron Goldman filed a civil lawsuit against him. This time, the jury found him liable for their deaths, ordering him to pay $33.5 million in damages. Simpson, however, managed to avoid paying most of that judgment, claiming financial hardship. His life after the trial spiraled further. In 2007, he was arrested in Las Vegas for armed robbery and kidnapping after attempting to reclaim sports memorabilia he claimed was stolen from him. This time, the jury had no sympathy. Simpson was convicted and sentenced to up to 33 years in prison. He served 9 before being released in 2017. Decades later, the O.J. Simpson trial remains more than just a murder case. It is remembered as a cultural turning point, a moment when race, celebrity, media, and justice collided. It changed how America viewed its legal system, how television covered trials, and how the world debated guilt and innocence. And still, the mystery lingers. Some believe O.J. was guilty, others believe he was framed. The only people who truly know what happened on that June night in 1994 are no longer here to speak. And that was the story of O.J. Simpson and the trial of the century. A case that divided a nation, shook the justice system, and still sparks debate nearly 3 decades later. But now, I want to hear from you. Do you believe the jury got it right? Was O.J. Simpson an innocent man framed by a corrupt system? Or did a guilty man simply walk free because of his fame and fortune? And what does this trial say about justice in America? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If you found this story compelling, don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss a new true crime documentary. Share this video with friends who love true crime and help us keep uncovering the stories that shaped history. Thank you for watching, and as always, stay curious, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. Before you go, if you think the O.J. Simpson trial was shocking, wait until you hear about the next case. It's a story of another seemingly ordinary person who harbored a darkness no one saw coming. A case that twisted from suspicion to horror, to something even stranger than anyone imagined. Watch the next video now, and keep uncovering the truths most people are too afraid to talk about. Because the story you just heard was only the beginning. Welcome back to Unsolved Crime Case, the channel where we explore the darkest and most chilling true crime stories from around the world. And tonight, we're going inside one of the most disturbing cases in modern history. On a quiet summer night in 1991, Milwaukee police entered a small apartment and stepped straight into a nightmare. Inside apartment 213, they found severed heads in the refrigerator, a human heart wrapped in plastic, a 57-gallon barrel filled with dissolving torsos. This was the home of Jeffrey Dahmer, the man who would soon be known as the Milwaukee Cannibal. But the most terrifying part of this story isn't just what they found. It's how many chances there were to stop him before it ever came to this. In this video, we'll take you deep into the life and crimes of Jeffrey Dahmer, from his troubled childhood, to the shocking police failures that let him keep killing, to the horrifying discovery that finally ended it all. So stay with us, because what you're about to hear will haunt you long after this video ends. The Jeffrey Dahmer Case, the Milwaukee Cannibal, 1991. July 22, 1991. Milwaukee, Wisconsin. Police officers are called to a quiet apartment complex after a man escapes from inside. What they find when they step through the door will become one of the most shocking discoveries in American crime history. Inside apartment 213 are human skulls in the refrigerator, severed heads in the freezer, and acid-filled barrels dissolving torsos. This was the home of Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer, a man who will forever be remembered as the Milwaukee Cannibal. But how does an awkward boy from Wisconsin become one of the most infamous serial killers in the world? Tonight, we go deep into the making of a monster, the horrifying details of his crimes, the shocking failures of the police, and the cultural legacy that still haunts us to this day. Stay with us until the very end, because this story isn't just about one man's evil. It's about how society itself allowed him to kill, again and again. Jeffrey Lionel Dahmer was born on May 21, 1960, in West Allis, Wisconsin. From the outside, his childhood looked ordinary. His father, Lionel, was a chemist. His mother, Joyce, was a homemaker. But inside the home, tension simmered. His mother struggled with her mental health, often overwhelmed, and arguments between the parents were frequent. Neighbors described Jeffrey as a quiet, shy child. But even from an early age, there were signs of something unusual. Unlike other kids, Jeffrey was fascinated by death. He collected roadkill, dissected small animals, and became fixated on bones. He later admitted that he liked the sound bones made when they clinked together. By his teenage years, Dahmer was drinking heavily. His classmates noticed he would sneak alcohol into class, even hiding beer in a jacket. To many, he seemed like just another troubled kid. But inside, Jeffrey's obsessions were growing darker. When his parents divorced during his senior year of high school, Dahmer was left increasingly isolated. And it was in that isolation that his violent fantasies took shape. In June 1978, shortly after graduation, Dahmer committed his first murder. He picked up 18-year-old hitchhiker Stephen Hicks. They spent the day drinking together. But when Hicks said he wanted to leave, Dahmer panicked. He didn't want him to go. He struck Hicks on the head with a dumbbell, strangled him, and then dismembered the body in his basement. He buried some remains in the backyard, smashing bones with a sledgehammer. At just 18 years old, Jeffrey Dahmer had crossed the line from fantasy into murder. But then, something strange happened. For nearly 9 years, Dahmer didn't kill again. It's as if he managed to suppress his urges, at least temporarily. But in 1987, the monster would return. And this time, he wouldn't stop. In September 1987, Dahmer met 25-year-old Stephen Twomey at a bar in Milwaukee. The two checked into a hotel room. Dahmer claimed he woke up the next morning with Twomey dead beside him, unable to remember the killing. He stuffed the body into a suitcase, transported it to his grandmother's basement, and dismembered it. From that point forward, Dahmer's murders became systematic. He developed a chilling routine: lure men back to his home with the promise of money, alcohol, or photographs. Once inside, he drugged them with sleeping pills, strangled them, and then dismembered their bodies. But Dahmer's crimes went far beyond murder. He engaged in necrophilia, photographing corpses in disturbing poses. He collected trophies, skulls, hearts, genitals, which he kept in his apartment. And in some cases, he ate the flesh of his victims. Between 1987 and 1991, Dahmer murdered 16 more men and boys. Most were young men of color, often marginalized members of society. They were easy prey for Dahmer, and tragically, their disappearances didn't always spark immediate investigations. At the Oxford Apartments, where Dahmer lived in apartment 213, neighbors often complained about foul smells and strange noises. But Dahmer always had excuses: spoiled meat, clogged plumbing. Most people accepted his explanations. To the outside world, Dahmer was quiet, polite, even friendly. But inside his apartment, he was living out fantasies that defy comprehension. One of the most shocking parts of this story is how many chances there were to stop Dahmer. In May 1991, 14-year-old Konorak Simpson became one of Dahmer's victims. Dahmer had drugged the boy and drilled a hole in his skull, attempting to create what he called a zombie who would remain under his control. Somehow, Konorak escaped the apartment. He was found on the street, naked, incoherent, and bleeding. Several women called the police. Officers arrived, but when Dahmer approached, he calmly explained that Konorak was his 19-year-old lover, simply drunk after a dispute. Despite the pleas of neighbors, the officers returned Konorak to Dahmer. Within hours, Konorak was dead. This failure became infamous. Investigations later revealed that the officers had laughed about the situation, even joking about reuniting lovers. Their negligence not only allowed Dahmer to continue but cost several more lives. Dahmer was also arrested in 1988 for sexual assault of a 13-year-old boy. He served just 1 year in prison. Had the justice system been more vigilant, his killing spree might have been cut short. Time and time again, red flags were missed, ignored, or dismissed. Imagine it. A terrified child escapes into the night, desperate for help, only to be returned to the arms of his killer. How many lives might have been saved if the police had listened? This is the moment where Dahmer could have been stopped forever. But instead, he was free to continue. And what came next was even more disturbing. On July 22, 1991, Dahmer lured 32-year-old Tracy Edwards back to his apartment. Once inside, Dahmer pulled a knife and threatened him. He attempted to handcuff Edwards, but only managed to secure one wrist. Edwards noticed gruesome Polaroids scattered around. He realized he was in mortal danger. But with remarkable courage, Edwards waited for the right moment. When Dahmer let his guard down, Edwards punched him in the face and escaped through the door. Running through the streets with a handcuff dangling from his wrist, Edwards flagged down police. Officers returned with him to Dahmer's apartment. What they found inside became one of the most infamous crime scenes in history. Inside the refrigerator were severed heads. In the freezer, a human heart. A 57-gallon barrel in the corner contained torsos dissolving in acid. Drawers were filled with bones. And in a bedside drawer, 74 Polaroid photographs of victims in various stages of mutilation. The officers were stunned. One detective later said, "It was like walking into hell." Dahmer was immediately arrested. Over the following days, He gave chilling confessions in a calm, matter-of-fact voice, describing every detail of his murders, his cannibalism, and his bizarre experiments to create submissive partners. In January 1992, Dahmer stood trial for 17 murders. His lawyers argued insanity, citing his necrophilia and cannibalism, but prosecutors insisted he knew what he was doing. The jury agreed. Dahmer was convicted of 15 counts of murder and sentenced to 15 consecutive life sentences, a total of 957 years. But Dahmer would not live long in prison. On November 28, 1994, fellow inmate Christopher Scarver attacked Dahmer in a prison bathroom, beating him to death with a metal bar. Scarver later claimed he acted on God's command. Even in death, Dahmer's story didn't fade. His case sparked outrage over police negligence, highlighted systemic prejudice, and forced society to confront the darkest corners of human psychology. Books, documentaries, and even dramatized series continue to retell the case, each time sparking new debates. Jeffrey Dahmer is remembered not just for his horrific crimes, but for the haunting questions his case left behind. How many warnings were ignored? How many victims could have been saved? And how many monsters might still walk among us, hidden in plain sight? Now, we ask you, was Jeffrey Dahmer's killing spree allowed to continue because of negligence, prejudice, or something even darker? Share your thoughts in the comments. Thank you for watching this documentary. Don't forget to like, subscribe, and share to help us continue bringing you more untold true crime stories. Until next time, stay safe.